There we go. And let's go ahead and introduce our speakers. Okay, so very excited for the topic today, which is leadership and succession. We heard from a lot of you that this was a big concern amongst a lot of groups in terms of planning for the future, developing young generations to become future leaders, and assuring that there is effective succession of leadership in your churches and organizations, so that they have a long, long life ahead of them. Our first speaker is going to be Bob Zdenek. Bob served as president of the National Congress for Community Economic Development, executive director of the Alliance for Healthy Homes, vice president for community building at United Way of America, director of special initiatives at the National Community Reinvestment Coalition, and served as president of the CDC Trade Association for 14 years. Bob has over 4 decades of leadership in community development. He serves currently as the interim executive director for the San Joaquin Valley Housing Collaborative and is a senior consultant with CECITA and the California Coalition for Rural Housing on disaster strategies and aging issues. He's written extensively on leadership and is co-author of Navigating Community Development, Harnessing Comparative Advantages for Creative Strategic Partnerships, published by Palgrave Macmillan. He co-managed a national initiative, Congregations as Partners in Community Development, with Lilly and Ford Funding. The initiative funded 40 partnerships in the late 1980s and early 1990s. And he has been a board member of Manna Incorporated, a faith-based organization in DC, worked at New Community Corporation, whose theme was faith, hope, and leverage, and is currently a member of session of the Montclair Presbyterian Church in Oakland. Our second speaker is going to be Wendy Ryan. Wendy is the CEO of Cadabra, with over 25 years of combined experience in human resources, organizational development, nonprofit leadership, and executive coaching. Wendy has partnered with hundreds of individuals and organizations throughout the US, helping frontline through C-suite leaders and board members achieve success as individuals and in teams. Wendy is the author of the award-winning bestseller, Learn, Lead, Lift, How to Think, Act, and Inspire Your Way to Greatness, and has been featured in Forbes, Yahoo News, Business Digest, Authority Magazine, CEO Magazine, and Thrive Global. Wendy is also an active mentor, strategic advisor, and angel investor in early stage BIPOC, LGBTQ+, and women-led companies, and an advocate for expanding diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in the investor and business ecosystem. Finally, our closer will be Gisela Salgado, who is the Director of Leadership Development Programs at the California Coalition for Rural Housing. Ms. Salgado graduated from CCRH's successful Model Rural West Internship Program for Diversity in Nonprofit Housing and Community Development in 2003. She has a bachelor's in business administration from the University of San Diego and leads the 2-decade nationally touted Rural West Internship Program for diversity in nonprofit housing and community development, the 3-phase racial equity process at CCRH, and development of a new fellowship program to support mid-career BIPOC emerging leaders in rural housing and organizations evolve management to support all staff. She values the work and collaborations of her 3-staff team, offering support to CCRH's leadership programs and racial equity efforts. So I realized that was a mouthful for me, and I know that was an earful for you. So let's just get straight to the presentation. And with that, I will hand it off to Bob. Let me just share my screen to present the presentation.
Thank you, Elias. And again, delighted to do this. I want to thank CECITA and Citizen Business Bank for doing these faith-based community development sessions. And when I was approached by Elias and Roberto Barragan, the executive director, I said, well, I can't talk for an hour. And I said, leadership's really broad. I said, I know 2 colleagues are terrific, and hopefully we can get them to do it. And we batted 1,000. We got both Wendy and Gisela, and Wendy's some wonderful work around attributes, how to become a leader, how to grow. And Casella's initiative is state of the art, and it's got a new phase, and so it's very exciting. So and again, so what I found, I want to talk about some of the research I've been doing, but I wanted to sort of ground it in the fact that from personal experience, just for a few minutes. When I was 27, which was a long time ago, as Elias read my bio, I found myself, being asked to be acting director of the National Congress for Community Economic Development, which was the CDC Trade Association. I mean, I was 27. I really had no leadership experience. I found myself taking over the organization and building it over time, but we didn't have the CCRH program. We didn't have very few things. So really, I had to really learn. I had to make it a really high priority. Leadership became a driver for me literally overnight. So I sought people out. I read. I talked to people. I asked a few people if they could help mentor me through this process, because I was running a national organization at a very young age. So over time, I began to watch leadership and realize how central leadership is to the growth of affordable housing and community economic development. And there are ways, and then also following the careers and development of many of the long-term leaders, because our field really came of age in the 1970s and 1980s. And there's a lot that we've learned. And so I wanted to sort of capture that experience. So one of the things I've been doing is talking to longtime community development leaders. And the first shot is the number of them who I interviewed in 2018 and 19. So just a little bit of background. I'm going to talk about some of the lessons. I'm going to talk about some of the stages of leadership. And then I'm going to leave with a number of recommendations, currently and moving forward, because we're at an interesting junction. I will touch on succession planning in a few minutes in the presentation, because that's an evolving area, and we're seeing a lot of turnover naturally because of the baby boomers aging out and a new generation that have not always been developed. And that's the beauty of what Casella is doing with the CCRH program, is that next generation of leaders, creating the long-term pipeline of leaders from their communities, which is terribly important. So next slide. Oh, so anyway, this was my writing partner Dee Walsh and I wrote the piece. I sort of talked about it. We wanted to capture the wisdom. Sadly, we've lost some longtime community development leaders, and we never had a chance to really sit down and talk to them about leadership and what they did, what they, how their style evolved, and what does it mean and how they mentored current and future leaders. So again, we wanted to write this article. I do want to throw in I occasionally throw in quotes, but one of the quotes that I really like about leadership, and leadership to me is an art. Leaders are not born, they develop, they grow. Anyone can be a leader, and there's different types of leaders. Leaders are not just the CEO is not the only leader in an organization. There are leaders at all levels. And so what we're really trying to do is develop the leadership. It's a concept of abundance. We can never have enough good leadership. And I like the quote of Warren Bennis, who actually took a course from him part-time in the 1990s. And he was a leadership person. He said, leaders do the right thing and managers do things right. So I'm going to say that again, leaders do the right thing. So they're the vision, the integrity, the values of the organization, and its managers. And leaders can manage. I'm not saying they can't manage, but it's the management function that really is charged with implementing, with doing the programs, with doing the services the best way possible. So it's important to see. So that was a very helpful distinction. You have to do both, but really focusing on doing the right thing. So next slide, please. Okay, so what we did was we interviewed these 12 longtime leaders, and you saw their pictures. Many of them were in California, partly because I wanted to spend time with them in person, not do it over the telephone. And that was pre-Zoom, by the way. So it was phone calls, not Zoom calls. And anyway, so after we talked to them, I interviewed them and started writing stuff up. So what are the themes that were emerging? Each one of them didn't have this as a theme, but most of them did. And so the first one was, our work is really grounded in social justice and human rights. That's how they identified. Those were sort of the pivotal early experiences that really launched them. And I think that's still true. I think the community development and affordable housing and faith-based work is really based on social justice and the rights of each individual to achieve their potential, and not to be and not to have health issues, environmental degradation, and many lack of access to financing. So social justice is really at the heart of it. The second one was the value of community engagement. It's not a one-person show. It's really about engaging, involving, and valuing the importance of community engagement. And many of our leaders, came through youth organizing, education, services. So not necessarily hard real estate development skills. That wasn't necessarily, there's only a couple of that background in that, but really the value of community engagement. Third area is being strategic. It's strategic and courageous leadership. And one of the people I interviewed is a woman named Lynette Jung Lee, who for 28 years was the executive director of the East Bay Asian Local Development Corporation in Oakland. And she was not your stereotype leader. Lynette was very quiet, but she was very effective. She was very tenacious. She was persistent. And one time her board, the Hotel California in Oakland was really falling apart, and it was really a valuable source of senior housing. She was persistent, and she brought her board around on it. Her board were a number of professionals that said, we don't want to touch this with a 10-foot pole because it's nothing but trouble. And she was able to over time convince them. So I think the notion of courageous leadership is a champion of place. We're both people and place. And so it's really important to be a champion of place. And I was sort of struck with Gordon Chin, who's the founding director of Chinatown Community Housing in San Francisco, who actually grew up in Oakland, Chinatown, saying that to him, San Francisco Chinatown was like the Harlem of Chinese communities. It was really like the home community, really where the national place where the Chinese community had really struggled, thrived, and supported each other. So this whole notion of place is really important. Policy, instinct for policy. Policy hugely, not at the federal, state, and local level, hugely influences what we do. And what we find with some of these leaders is that they really understood the importance of policy. They made it a priority. They were creative. They created some new initiatives around policy that had not been developed. And they really took the work that they and their staff and community were doing, and then tried to implement, try to figure out what are some of the policy levers and hooks. So that was a really key theme. Next, please. Next slide. And then this is one that's always challenging for groups, is balancing priorities, values with good business practices. And especially as you grow over time, the first article that Dee Walsh and I, we've now done 5 and we've got 2 more underway, wrote was called The Balancing Act. And it really acknowledged how do you scale and how do you stay true to serving residents? Because they're different. They can be somewhat different. So we saw the importance of the organization balancing those priorities, having the systems in place, having institutions, but at the same time not losing sight of who they're serving, the needs of their population, and making sure that they're serving underserved residents and low-income families and communities. So balancing is a really important thing here. Importance of good governance. Again, sometimes you have a strong leader and they don't necessarily want other strong leaders, but you really need good governance here, because these become very complex organizations very quickly. I mean, now some of them are 30, 40, 50 years old. And like your church, like those of you that are faith-based, your congregation in some cases is over 100 years old. I mean, not the members, but the church or the congregation. Good governance is a consistent theme, and people do leave. And so the transition, having good governance is really key, and having people that can really make decisions, can really, are the stewards of the organization beyond the CEO, executive director. This is obviously preaching to the choir, the growing importance of collaboration. As our work gets more complicated, as we do more, as we get bigger, we can't do it all. And one of the things that Dee Walsh, my writing partner, and I argue is that you should be good at a few things, and you partner and find collaborating organizations that have the skill sets that you don't have, so that you can provide that service and support. And we're seeing a lot of interesting examples. And I think 15 years ago, that might have been questioned more, but I think now it's pretty mainstream in terms of the value of collaboration. And last but not least is, as we have an aging workforce, nurturing youth in the next generation. And I think that's something we could have started earlier. I'm talking when I say we, the field, the community development faith-based field, but we really need to sometimes make up for lost time and really nurture youth in the next generation. I'm always amazed that I work with two young colleagues at the San Joaquin Valley Housing Collaborative, and just their communication and the way they think is invaluable. I think I need to, I think I need to go to, I think this ought to start a program for older leaders so that we can learn from the younger leaders, because that is so important what they're doing, the way they think. It's just a different way, and it's so valuable. So anyway, those are the leadership themes that we, it came out from the study. Next slide, please, Elias. Okay, so phases of leadership. What I want to do before I do that, I didn't include a slide, and I apologize, but I will give you a reference at the end. I'll give you a link. Is I think there's two types of, one of the things I like is the notion of enduring leaders. Our field really got started by entrepreneurs, and the people we interviewed were entrepreneurial, and that was really, and it still is very important, but I think that moving and being both entrepreneurial and enduring as an institution are really important around leadership. And so I'm going to give you a few examples. So an entrepreneurial organization is having leadership at the top. An enduring organization is having leadership at every level. An entrepreneurial organization is leading by vision. An enduring organization is leading by vision and goal setting. Again, not just vision, but also outcomes and clear direction. Entrepreneurial organization is leading by allocating scarce resources. An enduring organization is leading by creating strategic alliances. Then my favorite one is the entrepreneur is the leader as a boss. The enduring organization is the leader as a coach. There are leaders within our organization, and most of the leadership, this daily leadership decisions are not made by the executive director. They're made by the people that work in the field. They're interacting with the residents, interacting with the businesses and others, and they have to make decisions. They bring certain things back, but they still have to make spot decisions. So the notion of the leader is a coach. And then the leader under the entrepreneurial organization is the leader develops good administrators. The enduring organization is the leader develops future leaders. This whole notion of always developing leaders for the future, yes, because you don't know how long you're going to be staying there. So the four phases of leadership that we identified are strong visionary entrepreneurial leader who sees a problem to fix and takes the leap to faith to address it. Terribly important. I mean, these individuals started in low-income communities where very few people saw resources or potential or hope, and they saw it, and they were able to take their vision and move it forward through the organization. The second phase of leadership is the leader still sets the direction, but expands impact by involving more staff, often through delegation, but still helping them develop skills. Third phase, this is where we get into the notion of an enduring organization. It's built the organization into a significant institution and has learned to share leadership and authority within the organization. People are making decisions, there's more teamwork, there's more collaboration. I think this is the way where we are right now as a field in general, as we've moved mostly into this phase. Not that we don't have strong visionary leaders, we still do, and we'll have future visionary leaders. And then lastly, is that we have to think of ourselves, we're in ecosystems, is how do we impact larger ecosystems? It's not just enough to develop 2,000 or 3,000 units of housing. It's very important and very, very impactful, but how do we take that experience and leverage it with other sectors, leverage it with public health, especially now we've got climate change. So how do we work across borders and sectors and build our ecosystem? So it's more than just the organization, it's the community, it's the ecosystem, and the boundaries. So those are sort of four phases of leadership that I wanted to just show to all of you that we've been working on. Next slide, please. Succession plan. I was asked to talk about succession planning, and that's a work in progress. The succession plan has probably been around about 15, 20 years, but Dee and I are currently writing a paper for the Housing Partnership Network, which represents very large affordable housing developers throughout the country. There's over 100 of them that are part of it. And so they're very interested in succession planning because of the aging. So I'm going to share some very early stuff. We haven't written the paper yet. We just got the survey back about 3 weeks ago. So there's 3 cohorts. There's executive directors who have retired for at least a year. That's the first one. Executive directors who are planning to retire in the next 5 years. And sometimes that changes. Sometimes, as they say, the goalpost gets moved later. They don't leave us when they initially say they are. And new CEOs, people who have replaced the retired executives. And so just some real quick data just to show you that 79% of the recently retired executives cite age as a major factor. And many of them are over 65. So yes, and others would say 42% had achieved success and had a good team in place. And they thought it was a good time to leave. 58% worked with consultants to help them prepare for retirement. I think this is an evolving practice that's really important, that you can't just announce, well, I'm leaving in a year. You have to work with a consultant to help you prepare and to help the organization transition and shift. And it's up to 58%, so that's a promising development. Strategic plans, 47% finished up a strategic plan, and 32% put a new plan in place. And so I'm sort of chuckle a bit because I find it interesting that 32% put a new plan in place. They're not going to be there. I think it's challenging for I've had this happen to me, so I can speak. I've made many mistakes. And one of them was actually coming into an organization and allowing the board chair to do a new strategic plan in my first 6 months when I barely knew my way to the bathroom. I mean, it takes time, but at the same time, you don't want to tie them down with a new plan for the next 3 years when they arrive. They need some continuity and change, but eventually they need to put their mark in their organization and the staff in a new strategic plan. So anyway, that was my comment about that. Not a big fan of putting new plans in place when you're getting ready to leave. Then transition time, you provided 12 months notice. 82% told their staff within a year. It was funny, a couple more different in terms of telling the board, staff, and partners. And I said, well, how do you do that? Because people find out, once it's hard to keep secrets, or maybe it's hard for me to keep a secret. But anyway, next slide, please. And then 53% of this is important, spent time strengthening their leadership team for their eventual departure. They learned how to delegate better. Now, I think the younger leaders currently, are better at delegating and better at sharing power than some of the longer term leaders for a number of reasons, which we maybe go into later on. Half of the retiring CEOs plan to overlap with the new CEO 1 month to 1 year. It's always helpful to have a transition, a handoff. Is a year too long? It really depends on the situation, but I tend to think that shorter is better. 1/2 of the new CEOs have been affiliated with the organization, so they were on staff in the inside. 81% of the new CEOs found board support critical. Absolutely, and the board really has to step up early, during the transition, so that they're able, and that it's going to take some of their time. And one thing you don't want to see is a board chair leaving at the same time the executive director leaves. That's huge. That's too much change. Biggest challenge to the new CEOs for tackling needed organizational change. Well, yeah, because the culture and the strategies are from the previous leadership. 96%. That's as close as you get to 100%. Shifting organizational culture, and would have liked a handbook from the previous CEO and coaching. And Gazelle's program speaks to that very well. But anyway, so that's there's a lot more to this, but I just wanted to just share what we saw with the surveys, and then our report will be out by the end of the year. So we'll definitely try to share it out. Okay, then I want to just talk about sort of moving to the future real quickly, is how COVID and racial injustice, I mean, these are the issues of our time, or COVID's the variant of our time, but how do we navigate through these? And so I think this is really important as we look at future leadership. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, so now I want to just quickly go through looking forward. And again, I've talked about the social justice being the issue of our time, along with climate change. And we have to operate our programs very differently. We have to be, we might have been implicit in the past, but we need to be explicit today and tomorrow about our actions and how we are anti-racist and the diverse communities we serve. Collaboration, I've already talked about that, but you can see that later. Data and technology, hugely important. Again, for some of us that are longer term leaders that didn't grow up with the technological systems that we currently have, it's more challenging, but we have to make that central to our work and finding out and knowing and being able to respond. It really helps with delivery. Focus on what I call focus on what is possible. Don't get stuck. I always say perfection is the enemy of the good. Find something you can do, do it, learn from it, build it, and then you'll grow. It's like it's like the easy path to success before you take very complex initiatives. I said, don't get stuck, don't stop. Okay, next. Again, we're seeing a whole new series of new, and the recent IRA bill points out really well about some of all these new resources in energy conservation and climate change that are available. So there's a lot of different resources, and our work is crossing boundaries. That doesn't mean we have to do it all. We can find partners that do it, and we collaborate, because housing and community development are really fundamental to a healthy community in the context of larger systems and strategies. Then understand the fundamentals of what drive investors. What are they looking for? Because again, we're still very dependent upon outside public and private resources. Excel at forming key relationships. I've always said the 3 R's to economic development are relationships, relationships, and more relationships. So how do we respond? Use these relationships to adapt and respond. Advocacy, really important. Supporting local, state, national level. I'm really glad to see CECITA become more involved in. I have a long history with CECITA, and since Roberto's taken over, he's really gotten back into the advocacy arena, which is really important. We need to do that. Next, I'm almost done. Okay, well, I said that's one of our lessons that we learned about being courageous, strategic, and resilient. Leverage your core competencies, develop, manage, develop, and empower others. You don't have to do it all. You can forge interesting partnerships. Build enduring institutions that can weather difficult times. So those are some of the thoughts about looking forward with leadership. Next one. Recommendations. This looks like out of the CCRH textbook, but actually this is about 3 years old, Gisela. Develop training curriculums. We really need that, and what CCRH is doing, Massachusetts Association of CDCs and a few others are really, really important. Create communities of practice, create support groups. As I talk to people, one of the things they did it themselves, so they had like 4 or 5 colleagues that they formed these groups with, and they shared stuff. Really important to have that mentorship program. Again, this speaks to the work that CCRH is doing, research on leadership competencies and stuff. Wendy's really terrific book, Learn, Lead, and Lift, and learn about the barriers and opportunities and how you remove them for development of current and future community development leaders. And next slide. So these are the papers that we're actually Navigating Community Development is our book, and so we love it when people buy it. It's in paperback. We're actually coming up with another book in about 2 to 3 years, but we haven't started. We have a contract. The paper I talked about is the Community Development Leadership paper, Early Visionaries. New Way Forward is a paper we did on the importance of collaboration and partnerships. Balancing Act and Coming Together is working on policy at the national and local level. So that's some of our work. And again, welcome, your thoughts in any way that I can be helpful. So anyway, thank you for the opportunity, and I'll turn it back to Elias.
Thank you so much, Bob. Okay, let's keep this rolling. I'm going to share my screen, and our next presenter will be Wendy Ryan.
Hi all, I'm Wendy Ryan, CEO of Cadabra, and we catalyze growth and change for emerging through C-suite leaders. So many of the things that Bob talked about are really the things that we're trying to enable through our work. And I'm going to talk about 3 different things. Our work spans sectors. So we do work with for-profit companies, nonprofit, and faith-based organizations. And because of that, we have a lot of cross-pollination of ideas that goes on. And I think that it is really what has inspired the Learn, Lead, Lift framework, which I'm going to talk to you about, and our view on succession. So just a bit of personal history. I've been working initially as a volunteer and later as a paid consultant with faith-based organizations for over 20 years. So I think for me, that's been some of the most rewarding part of my practice. And some of those volunteer roles were things like being on the ground, providing direct support through St. Vincent de Paul Society. Some of those were teaching catechetics. So yes, I am Catholic, and I've been in and around the Catholic Church and those organizations for a number of years. And then later, in terms of professional engagement, what I've had the good fortune to work in is really 3 areas that I think were most impactful. One of those is what I would call future visioning for sustainability. So putting together not just a strategic plan, but also saying, beyond the life of a typical strategic plan, 3 to 5 years, what do we need to be thinking about for sustainability, say 10 years out? And what does that look like in a faith-based context? I think the second area where we've had a lot of involvement and impact has been in managing change. So this is a really salient issue for all organizations in all industries. And it's particularly challenging, I think, for faith-based organizations in particular, because we're also trying to honor the tradition that in some cases goes back thousands of years around how do we think about things, how do we do things. So I think it has some really unique dynamics there in managing change that are interesting. And the third area has really been around developing leaders in those contexts. So what does it mean to be a leader in a faith-based organization now? What does it mean to be a senior leader? And then succession is really an important topic that runs through all three of those. So I want to talk to you about why leadership might feel like it's been changing and needs to continue to evolve. So what's the landscape we're dealing with and why? And then what's a framework for developing the next generation of leaders? And then how do we integrate that into succession? So first of all, to ground us in what we think about when it comes to leadership, we look at leadership as essentially influence. And it's influencing for the purpose of creating a specific result that's not just solely about satisfying your own interests. So there's always an element of service and we, not me, that is characteristic of how we think about great leadership. Next slide. Thanks, Elias. And so why does leadership feel like it's evolving? Or why are we walking around, those of us who've been perhaps in a leadership role for a while and going, is it just me, or does it seem like people have different expectations all of a sudden for what we're supposed to be doing and how I'm supposed to be showing up? And so I developed something that I call 21st century leadership calculus. I thought if I could come up with an equation that sort of explained this in a way that was really concise, would that make it a little bit easier for us to talk about? And so I came up with this, and there are three acronyms here: depth, VUCA, and I EAT. So those are the three things: depth, VUCA, and I EAT. So depth stands for demographic changes, extreme weather events, pandemics, technology, innovation, and then health becoming more holistic. So those are 5 megatrends that you can do a Google search, you can read papers, and you can learn a lot about what are those trends that are impacting every organization on the planet, regardless of what our mission might be. And those together are driving an unprecedented volume of VUCA. VUCA stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. That's the context that we're all trying to lead in. And VUCA's always been with us. I don't think there's probably ever been a time in human history where we could look to and say, there was no VUCA then, so I think it's always been here. But I think for a lot of us, it feels like the volume has turned way up. So the pace of it and the intensity of it is what we're really noticing now and trying to lead through. It's very tough. And so depth creates VUCA, and VUCA is requiring different type of leadership. And that's really highlighted by 4 things. One is it has to be inclusive. We have to think about who are we leading and all of the different ways that people actually identify. And that's different from how we've thought in the past. Equity-minded. We have to think about how does everyone get what they need in order to have access to the same opportunities. Authentic. How do we show up authentically and encourage and make space for other people to do that? And that really enables people to do their best work. That's why it matters in a organizational context. And trauma informed. We've had a lot of trauma. COVID introduced trauma to a lot of people. Some people have multi-generational trauma. It's with us. Again, it's always been with us. And as leaders, because we're now in this context, we really need to understand the role that trauma is playing in people's day-to-day lives. And then that becomes part of our work life and be part of our organization as well. So these are things that leadership now needs to pay attention to and develop competency around. Next slide. So I eat leadership, inclusive, equity-minded, authentic, and trauma-informed, is really at the heart of the Learn, Lead, Lift framework. So I wrote a book, and the question that I was trying to answer in the book was, what makes leadership great? What makes leaders great? And not just what do I think about that based on the work I've done, but what do a lot of other people think about that who come from all different walks of life, all different faith traditions, all different professional journeys. And what emerged from that was the Learn, Lead, Lift framework. And the framework gives us a way to understand great leadership as the synergy of 3 different elements. So this might remind you a little bit of the periodic table. If any of you ever took chemistry or you've seen the periodic table somewhere, it might look a little bit like that. Mindsets are how you think. So these are the mental lenses that you wear all the time. You don't even notice them, but they're essentially informing what you notice, what you remember, what you learn, what you pay attention to. Skill sets are what you know or know how to do. So the analogy here that I use are handheld tools, like a hammer, a nail, a saw, something that you can pick up and use, and you can also put it down again, and you can pick up new tools along the way. So skill sets are a little bit easier to observe, and they're a little bit easier to acquire. Mindsets are harder for us to see and a little bit harder for us to work on sometimes. Behavior is how you show up to others. So when we talk about behaviors, we're looking at what are the ways that other people experience us as a leader. So if I say to someone, you know, I think I'm very decisive, you know, I make decisions very quickly, and everyone on my team knows that they don't have to wait too long for a decision. I might think that, but if everybody else on my team, if you were to take a Zoom poll and everyone else on my team said, oh my gosh, it takes forever to make a decision, then we have a gap there. So a lot of times when we're thinking about leadership behaviors, the key is, how do we think we're showing up? And then how are we actually showing up? And are those 2 things consistent? We identify in the framework 5 behaviors in particular that I think really relate to succession and are important for you to keep in mind in terms of looking at leadership capacity in your organization. And the acronym we use for that is FIDAH, F-I-D-A-H. FIDAH stands for focus, integrity, decisiveness, authenticity, and humility. Consistently, those 5 things, focus, integrity, decisiveness, authenticity, and humility, were the way that people describe great leaders. So every time I ask someone, whether they were an investor, a philanthropist, a community development professional, a teacher, a therapist, a farmer, I said, what does great leadership mean to you? It had to do with 1 or more of those 5 things, which I find very interesting. It tells us that there's something about leadership that really doesn't have anything to do with how we're educated or where we live or where we came from. There are some universal things. So I think that we don't have time today to go into all the elements of the framework, but I will say there are 6 mindsets we identified, there are 7 skill sets, and there are those 5 behaviors that I shared. So if you're interested in this as a tool, know that the details are there. We just don't have time to go into all of them today. So what does this all mean for succession? I've been thinking about this, and then I was listening to Bob's talk, and I was trying to say, how does what he's talking about and what I'm thinking about, how can we sort of connect the 2 for you? I think, you know, one thing I noticed, Bob, that you mentioned was being adaptable, being flexible, and being collaborative. And I think that's very much in line with what I would say is important as well. So when we think about succession, I think the first piece of advice I would have is make sure you have what I would call an if-then plan. I think one of the things COVID reminded us is that very often succession happens in an unplanned way. And we, in my experience, most of the time, we're not prepared for that, or we've thought about succession for one or two people at the top of the organization, but we haven't really thought about it anywhere else. Kind of if you go a level or two down, there are really key people who are managing key projects and initiatives for us that if they were to leave tomorrow for whatever reason, most organizations are not prepared to deal with that. So I think the first step is really to make sure that you have a plan in place and you've thought through for those key positions, regardless of what the title is, make sure you have that if-then plan. And secondly, I think focus on advancing leadership readiness. So it's not so much what does somebody know or know how to do. Again, just what is their expertise or skill set? It's how do they think and how are they showing up? If they're thinking in ways that support the advancement of your mission and support leading in a VUCA context really well, then those are people you want to pay attention to and you want to build readiness there. Third, if you've been thinking or talking about the need to build a more diverse board or leadership team, now is the time to stop thinking about it and you've got to act. So what happens when we talk about the importance of diversity, equity, inclusion, but we still have a scenario where everyone on the board and everyone on the leadership team looks like me and shares the same background? People see that and your best talent is going to leave over time. So this is a time to really be serious and act on that because you want to have the best talent pool possible going forward into the future. And then I think the last piece I would leave you with before I hand it off to Gisela would be that great leadership now depends more than ever on influencing through positive relationships that are based on mutual respect and reciprocity. So again, go think about your organization and think about who does this best in your organization and how do you support them in developing. It may not be the same people who know the most or who are anything like you are. Look for those people who do that well. And I think next slide is how you can learn more. So there's a QR code here you can scan and it'll take you directly to a page to learn more about the Learn, Lead, Lift framework. You can check out the book, the website, and would love to connect and answer any follow-up questions you may have. So thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. And I'm actually going to be putting a link to some resources around the Learn, Lead, Lift framework in the chat. So if you guys want to know more,
great.
Go ahead and click on that link. There it is. And coming up, last but not least, of course, is our closer, Gisela Salgado. Let me just share my screen and get her presentation up.
Thank you, Elias. And as you do that, again, thank you for the introduction. And thanks to both Bob and Wendy. Bob for grounding us on the history of leadership development in our industry, housing, affordable housing, and community development. And Wendy, I appreciate the call to action in terms of leadership development now in succession planning, because it's so critical. And I think that Bob mentioned we should have started this like long ago. So it's critical. And again, I'm here representing the California Coalition for Rural Housing. We are a nonprofit organization that was established in 1977. That was more than a few years ago. And CCRH for short. It's one of the oldest state low-income housing coalitions in the entire country. We do several things. So through advocacy, organizing, research, technical assistance, and leadership development, our goal is to make the case for rural housing improvement and strengthen the capacity of the nonprofit and public sectors to provide affordable housing and related facilities throughout the state. Members are primarily community-based nonprofits and public developers, including the largest self-help housing producer in the United States, as well as local government officials and local activists concerned about rural quality of life. So that's who we are. And again, I'm here actually to present to you and share with you about two programs that have been developed by CSRH to create a new generation of BIPOC leaders to strengthen our sector, a diverse, inclusive, and equitable rural housing field. So we can go on to the next slide, please. So we created our model internship program that Elias actually briefly talked about and that I graduated from myself, again, a few months ago. And this is our CSRH internship program for diversity in nonprofit housing and community development. It was launched back in 1998. So this year marks our 25th anniversary, and we're very proud of the outcomes of this program. The program was intentionally created to bring diverse young people into our nonprofit housing field, especially in one of the sectors and areas where it's there's an evident lack of diversity, but it's also one of the most complex technical areas of community development, which is real estate and housing development. If you talk to any affordable housing developer, they will tell you that it takes years to develop skills to be able to do that, understand the financing the layer financing that goes into that. It's very competitive to be able to get these funds to be able to build housing, learning about land use, the entitlement process, working with community activists and public officials to bring support for affordable housing in some areas where it can be very challenging because of opposition from communities that are very conservative or may not understand affordable housing in the way that we do. So we, the California Coalition, really decided that this program was going to be structured and created to really address that lack of diversity in affordable housing development and to be able to provide the skill set, training, mentoring, and the opportunity for young people who come from the same communities that our nonprofit housing developers serve to be part of this field because those perspectives matter. So since we created the program, we have graduated over 200 students that have gone through this internship program. 50% are still in the field, many of them in leadership positions today, which is something that we're very proud of. And we're also happy to provide technical assistance and support other organizations who are looking to be able to apply some of our best practices with this particular model. So we can go on to the next slide. Again, we're very proud of the outcomes of the program. And despite the successes in BIPOC recruitment and retention in our field, we're still facing some challenges, especially in leadership and higher level positions in our field. So here are some of the challenges that we're facing. The lack of retention at mid-career and executive level positions, staff burnout, lack of diversity and representation in executive and senior level positions, and piecemeal interventions over holistic ones that I think, again, Wendy, you really highlighted in terms of, we are in a changing era, right? There are new needs and there's really a need to really rethink about leadership and how we support people, especially, a new generation of leaders that come from very different backgrounds and perspectives than traditionally has been, especially in our field. Okay, let's go on to the next slide, please. So again, how can we change the way we view leadership development in housing? And I'm sure this applies to other sectors too. So stakeholder engagement. Because of the issues that I just mentioned, the California Coalition for Rural Housing and our stakeholders, we came together in thinking that how can we really provide support? So how can we address the issues that I just mentioned? And so we hired a consultant a year ago to take us through a stakeholder engagement to understand what are the needs and how can we support our organizations and really our industry and strengthen our industry with this new way of being able to build new leaders and be able to really support staff. So we conducted a stakeholder engagement process, as I mentioned. We interview different groups of people, including alumni graduates of our internship program who are in the field, and also those who are no longer in the field, to hear why they left. We also interview partners, funders, academics who have been engaged in our internship program in terms of recruitment purposes. We have partners in academia, and also our CSRH member organizations and executive directors of the organizations that have been participating in our internship program as host agency placements. So this stakeholder engagement process validated CSRH original intent to train the sector's emerging professionals and the need and just how critical it is to do this. A call on rural housing organizations to align organizational management to the values of inclusion, which again, Wendy also talked about. Leading with inclusivity is really important, and trauma-informed practices are really important. And the stakeholder engagement also call on CSRH to train individual fellows and organizational leadership that wishes to support and retain them. So that I think goes to Bob's point that yes, we can learn from each other, because it doesn't really, even if you've been a leader for many years or you are an emerging leader, there's always something new to learn, and to be able to collaborate with one another and hear each other out and really address any particular issues or ways to strengthen internally the organization that everyone is working in and has a vested interest in ensuring that the mission is accomplished. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. So this is a response to the issues. We are in the process of developing an Emerging Leaders Fellowship for Housing in the Rural West that we're really excited about. This program is going to be launching in 2023. It's completely new. And we listened to, again, the feedback from the stakeholder engagement. And so this fellowship is unique, innovative. I don't think anyone is doing something like this. And basically, we are going to be training our emerging leaders in some of the technical aspects that I explained about that are required to be able to build affordable housing successfully. And also, we're going to be engaging managers and executives of the organizations where these emerging leaders are coming from and working with, so that we can also provide training and organizational management in this way new of thinking about leadership. We're going to be providing coaching and mentoring for all of the participants. This is going to be an 18-month program. We're going to have in-person and online convenings along the way. We're also going to be providing mentoring opportunities and ongoing support to all the participants, peer groups. So the CEOs will have their own peer group that they can lean on. Same thing with the managers and the emerging BIPOC fellows. Okay, we can go on to the next slide. So again, this particular model calls for the engagement from different levels of the organization so they can come together and have a space to really collaborate together. So we are going to be asking for those organizations that are interested in participating in this fellowship to come with the CEO of their organization or equivalent senior, at least one emerging leader, although it can be more than one, and a manager or department director to be part of this fellowship. Let's go on to the next slide. And again, our fellowship has 3 curriculum areas. The first one is project management training technical and financial skills development for fellows, the emerging leaders. And project management training is going to be teaching the technical and financial expertise, the foundation of effective affordable housing development. CCRH is reimagining rigorous technical training to be participant-oriented and combined with strategic and organizational learning in order to prepare rising professionals to take on organizational leadership. So this is curriculum area 1. Let's go on to the next slide. Curriculum area 2 is organizational leadership capacity building training for fellows, managers, and CEOs. So all 3 group participants are going to be engaging in this curriculum area. And organizational leadership capacity building is going to be teaching the value of reframing leadership and management to include supporting staff based on a learning-oriented culture, open mindset, a mindset of growth, proven to make a difference in recruitment and retention. The training is going to take the CEOs out of isolation in their positions to study the organization's current practices with the fellows and managers from the same organization in a fun collegial environment. So they're going to be able to do this thinking together as a group in support of each other. Let's go on to the next slide. Curriculum area 3, we call it Adapting HR for CEOs. And Adaptive HR is going to teach how to apply the reframe leadership and management lens from curriculum area 2 to the organization's HR practices, culminating in defining an HR project that will best meet the organization's highest potential in recruitment and retention. And we know that each organization is different, and that's why we're going to have, as I mentioned before, coaches that are going to be working with the organizational teams so that they can also provide support in terms of being able to come together and assess what are the needs of the organization and what are some tangible ways in which they can support the organization working together. Let's go on to the next slide. Thank you. And there's also going to be an experiential project for the fellows as well. So each fellow is going to be applying their learning to the housing development project that they bring to the fellowship. Their housing project is going to become a case study to test new thinking and knowledge. And their final project presentation will showcase how their learning helped them. They may include testimonials from their project management or organizational team members. So the fellows will be asked to present their learnings and the project that they are managing or overseeing at their organization. Let's go on to the next slide. And similarly, we are going to be really excited to hear the CEOs about their own project and how they're applying curriculum area to learning in collaboration with their team and presenting to peers about the project that they have identified that they want to implement at their organization and share their learnings with the team and with their peers. Let's go on to the next slide, please. And so this is our fellowship timeline. We are currently actually having an open call for trainers and coaches. We will need a lot of experts in the field. And I don't want to say experts, but folks who also have the intention to support this framework, right? And who also understand and want to contribute to leadership development and align with our goals and with our values. So we have an open call for trainers and coaches until the end of this month. We're going to be announcing the participant application. So we are going to have an open call for participant applications in late September of 2022. We're going to select the fellowship participants in late November. And we're going to be launching this program, as I mentioned, in 2023. And the fellowship is 18 months long. So it's going to conclude in March of 2024. Let's go on to the next slide. So this is what we are aiming to do with this fellowship. And on the left, you will see what we are used to seeing in terms of leadership development in our industry. And perhaps this is something that happens across other industries too, which is individual participation, right? Putting it on the emerging leader or individual to receive all the training. And I will say, to some level, respect that one individual can change and make like shifts in an organization when it's really an organizational task. I mean, it requires everyone's collaboration to be able to accomplish that. We again see that there's a lot put on individual development, again, rather than organizational development, executive sign-off, and technical skill training, which is needed. I mean, we need those technical skills, as Wendy also highlighted. That's part of leadership development, but it's not the only thing. So what we're trying now is to engage staff from all levels of the organization, to have organizational learning in teams, so that, again, it's not put on one person to make these changes. To executives, to have calling executives to learn to shift leadership and management thinking, and providing technical and holistic training. That's what we're now aiming to do. Let's go on to the next slide. And by doing this, we aim to transform leadership in a new era and have a collaborative approach to management and do this cultural shift in a way, flattening the hierarchy and having more delegation within the organization, and really power sharing, which I think, Bob, you mentioned that you see that in younger generations of leaders, they seem to be more able to do that than older generations. So that is something that we know that it's going to continue on and needed in our sector, in our industry. Valuing existing skills, abilities, and lived experience, which is very important, especially in our field, when there's a lack of affordable housing, and there's a large percentage of people, BIPOC people, who are affected by the issue of affordable, adequate housing. So it is important, again, to have those perspectives and to be able to inform the decisions about housing from people so that come from the communities that we're serving. Creative opportunities to demonstrate leadership, learning and growing together as leaders. So again, by doing and providing these internship and leadership programs, we seek to affect and impact organizational culture change so that we can support a housing industry in which people want to stay and contribute and become the leaders. I mean, I don't want to say the leaders of tomorrow, because I think that we're all leaders in our own way, but that we're able to sustain that leadership in our industry, that talent in our industry for years to come, to be able to address that ever-changing and ever challenging issues that we're facing: climate change, lack of housing, and so many other social justice issues that we have in front of us. So again, thank you so much for the opportunity to share our internship program model and this new fellowship as a way to address this issue of needing to invest in leadership development. And I think, yes, I think all the panelists here are happy to answer any questions folks may have.
Thank you so much, Gisela. I am only seeing one question currently in the Q&A from Jack Miranda, asking, is the capacity building opportunity for emerging CDCs a competitive one? I'm not sure if that's in specific reference to the initiative that CECITA is doing and planning to provide free technical assistance training. In the context of that, we will be choosing only one organization from the organizations that do apply. So I don't have the numbers on how many have applied yet, but considering we're only choosing one, I would call that pretty competitive. If any of the panelists have maybe a more general or broad answer to that question, you can feel free to address it. Yeah, I think that was specific to the RFP that we put out for the free of charge technical assistance training or technical assistance to become a CDC. If anybody else has any questions, now's your last chance. go ahead.
I was gonna add a little, capacity building is getting more and more attention, and Giselle's program is sort of the best example, but there are also NeighborWorks America, Enterprise Community Partners and others are doing capacity, they're having cohorts and they're doing types of capacity building training. So you may be interested in some of their efforts, and some of them are fairly inexpensive because I think they're basically subsidized off foundation money. And then the internship program that CCRH is developing is sort of the best example.
Thank you, Bob. I have dropped a survey in the chat. If all attendees can please take the time to fill out that survey, it really helps inform our future webinars. It's only a couple questions. I swear it's quick, painless. But I'm not seeing any other. Oh, Raina Jackson asks, will we be able to get a copy of the training slides, please? Yes, you will all receive an email, a follow-up email with copies of the presentations, as well as a copy of the recording of this webinar. So you will have those resources at your disposal. Not seeing any more questions, and we're just about reaching the end of our time. I want to thank all the attendees for taking the time today to attend the webinar, and I want to deeply thank all our panelists, Bob, Wendy, and Gisela. You bring such a breadth of experience and knowledge when it comes to this topic, and I think your inputs have been really, really valuable. So thank you all. Watch out for that follow-up email that will include resources, and please apply to that RFP to get that free technical assistance and join us over in the CDC world. So everyone have a great day. Thank you so much, and hope to see you all on our next webinar, which will be concerning rural affordable housing, and that'll be in October. So thank you all again, and have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Yeah.